Welcome to the Notorious Scoundrels, a Star Wars Legion podcast bringing you the latest news, general perspective, and competitive discussion.
Hello and welcome back to the Notorious Scoundrels podcast. I'm Kyle. I'm here with Jay.
Just Jay.
Just Jay, which means that this is going to be primarily a hobby episode today.
Yeah, very excited about this. And seems like people, you guys tell us out there, but so far people have really liked the rotation. So that was exciting. Last week we did our 101, which was really great. I had a good time on that. And this week is hobby, which is very exciting. Kyle and I are both, I know we've been doing the podcast more about the, competitive scene, but we're both super hobby enthusiasts, so it's really nice to be able to talk about this.
Yeah, for sure. I have been painting miniatures since I was 12 for second edition 40K. That was the first miniatures game that I got into, and I had no idea of any of what this world entailed or the gateway drug that it would be.
Yeah.
But of course, 12-year-old me was like, oh, Space Marines, that's so cool. I ended up playing Tyranids when I was 12. But yeah, my hobby journey has been a long one.
Yeah.
But I've been painting miniatures for 25 years. So
do you feel like you and I have been doing it about the same amount of time? Maybe you're a little bit longer, but like, do you find that there's things like you've been doing it for so long that you forget things, and then like one day you're painting and you're like, oh yeah, I did this on this model like 12 years ago. Like I just like it just like pops in your head again and you're like, oh my God, yeah, that's right. I forgot all about that.
Yeah, and actually we can relate this to our topic today too, because this is a basing thing. But yeah, there are some things where I'll like forget a technique or forget a part of a process and why I do something a certain way if I haven't done it in a while, and then I'll go back and I'll make the same mistake again. I'll be like, oh yeah.
Yeah,
that's why. And you're still constantly learning things too, like 25 years of painting, and it's only been within the last really 4 to 5 years that I've actually started using an airbrush, for example.
Same. Yeah,
so it's, you're always learning new stuff.
Yeah, you actually, like, I've always wanted an airbrush and it's something I've always thought about, but really it was you that encouraged me to really get into it. And I mean it's funny because it's just like an added tool to my arsenal. Like in my head, I think when I was thinking about the airbrush and hearing people talk about it, I'm like, well, I don't want to paint with only airbrush. Like for whatever reason, that's what was in my head, was like, oh, I'm only going to paint with airbrush from now on. That makes no sense. But it's just this added tool to help you do different things, right? And it's just a really nice addition to my arsenal, and I'm so very happy that I invested in it and got like a little spray booth. I know that was something that people were asking in our Discord that we could talk about briefly today, but how we keep our spray booth and how that all works indoors.
Mine's super it's a very rudimentary setup. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
But yeah, it doesn't have to be that crazy for an airbrush.
Yeah,
we can talk about that. How about first, before we dive into that, let's do some housekeeping.
Housekeeping.
Yeah, so let's talk Patreon. I know we mention this every month, and I'm so appreciative of everyone that supports us on the Patreon. And the reason we bring this up is because it does absolutely help. We offer all our content free to you guys. So the blog, our 3 Legion podcasts, us, Legion 99, and the 5th Trooper podcast. So all that is free to you. It is not free to us, as we have hosting charges and software that I have to edit this and to do all those cool intros and outros that I've been doing. And we like to pay the staff as well, so that they feel like that they're connected, and because I think doing this for the love of it is what we're all doing, but it's also nice to, to have a few shekels in your pocket as well,
Yep.
so that you have, I think it's mostly for our like wives and girlfriends and boyfriends and all that, and husbands, where it's like, well, I mean, I did kind of get paid for it, so it's kind of my job too,
Yeah.
so I think that's a helpful thing. So, if you want to help our staff not get divorced or separated from their significant others, sign up for a Patreon. I'm very genuinely, we appreciate anything that you can do and help. Even if you do the $1 a month, like that's $12 closer to something we could be doing for the staff, or paying for our hosting, or like, Kyle needs a new mic, like things
do.
like that.
Yep.
That's what the Patreon goes to. So you're really just supporting the content. In addition, we send you some cool stuff, and we also have an After Dark podcast. I've been thinking a lot about other things that I want to offer, like content wise, on Patreon. So, I'm going to start doing that soon and make some changes, but, really just come support us. It just helps us, get everything that we need to make this work. And so please, thank you. Go to patreon.com/the fifth trooper. And, if you could just do $1 a month, that would be amazing.
Yep. Awesome.
Yeah. Other housekeeping other than that, check out the blog. If you don't know, we have a blog, thefifthtrooper.com. We also have 2 other Legion podcasts. We have Legion 99 and The Fifth Trooper, and we have several other podcasts going on right now as well. So if you check out our YouTube channel, or take a look on wherever you get your podcasts, all our podcasts are available there. And yeah, it would be really great if you guys just like supported the rest of our content too. That'd be awesome.
Yep.
So yeah, that's it.
All right. Well, before we get into our main hobby talk, how about we start with some news?
Welcome to In the News.
So there were a couple of pretty big tournaments this weekend.
Yeah.
Kind of the first like major tournaments using the new points.
Mm-hmm.
There was the Indy Open in Indianapolis, which I want to say had about, you know what, I'm going to look this up, because if I
Please.
misquote the number of players, I will be sad. So
yeah, so will the people who ran it, I'm sure.
Yeah. Right. Okay. The Indy Open had 49 players. So
Wow, that's a really good turnout.
that's a very good turnout. And the Atlantic City Open in, of course, Atlantic City, New Jersey, which unfortunately I could not go to this year, even though it's fairly close to me. My daughter had a dance recital on Saturday, so
Oh, nice.
can't miss that. There's
No.
only one of those a year.
Yeah.
But that one had 32 players. So yeah, 2 pretty good sized tournaments with the new points. Those both happened this weekend, and they were both super interesting with respect to stuff that succeeded. Some old, some new, some expected, some unexpected. We will talk in more detail about both of those next week on our non-hobby episode.
Yeah.
And then also almost certainly in some blog articles. But just briefly, the Indy Open was won by Brian Bear.
Yeah.
So
old Mr. FD Cannons himself.
Yeah, triple FD, put him
Yeah.
on the map. But of course, Brian is a very good, consistent player.
Yeah.
So a often Rebel player, and in fact, that's what he played at this tournament. This is the first tournament won by Rebels in recent memory.
Yeah, in a while. I was gonna say
Yeah.
I can't even think of one.
Yeah. It was a Mando list. So I'll say that much. We can get into more detail
Nice.
next week. But
Yeah.
it was a Mandalorian list. And then the Atlantic City Open was won by our very own Austin Miller.
Yeah, boy.
So and he was running Cad Bane Ventress.
Yep.
Which was a list that people had been kind of banding about as something that was interesting even before the points update. Some of the predators of that list got some points increases and or nerfs. And I think it's pretty good. So
yeah. Yeah, and if if you don't know, Austin's on the Fifth Trooper podcast and he writes for our blog. So
Yep.
So congratulations to them. It's always nice to have a team win. That's for sure.
Yep.
So
all right. So congrats to Austin and Brian. We will talk more about those next week when we're not talking hobby. But
Yeah.
all right. Should we get into hobby?
Get out your brush and paint. It's hobby time.
So today we're going to talk primarily about basing, but before we get to that, because I think it'll be relatively quick and some folks on our Discord had questions about it, how about we talk about the setup for airbrush?
Yeah. So it's interesting. Mine is, I wouldn't say sophisticated, but I basically, what I did was I went to Amazon and I just bought, they had a travel airbrush booth that actually has lighting in it and it has a
Oh, wow.
filter in the back. It wasn't that much money. It was like 70 or 80 bucks. Like it
Okay.
wasn't like, you know what I mean?
Uh-huh.
Compared to like some of the models we buy, like it's about the same,
Right,
you know,
yeah.
the same price.
That's not much more than a box of dark troopers right there.
Yeah, right. And
Yeah.
so I got that. I had an old air compressor from my wife used to do like cake airbrushing or whatever. Like that was a hobby she was trying for a while and it didn't work out. And so I had a compressor from that, and then I got a Badger. And so like that's my setup. I don't know. Okay, so listen, I'm not gonna give you any health advice. I have the filter set up and it has a vacuum in it that sucks all the, but I don't wear a mask or anything.
I don't either.
So I know some people do. I've seen some YouTube creators wear masks while they're spraying, but also they didn't have a vent around, so maybe that was why.
Well, so there's a couple of reasons for that.
Yeah.
And again, I am not an expert. Please do not take
Yeah,
health advice from me.
please. Yeah.
This is my understanding from just studying airbrushing and taking an airbrushing class. The short version, it depends on what kind of paint you're using. Supposedly acrylic paint is not toxic.
Yeah.
So if you're just painting with acrylic paint, which is going to be most of, the Citadel stuff, most of the Army Painter and all like most of the major brands of miniatures paint are just normal, good old fashioned acrylic paint. And if that's what you're using, you don't want to like be constantly breathing in the fumes, but
Yep.
it's not like specifically toxic.
Right.
So I think that generally on YouTube, when people are wearing masks and stuff, either they have generally poor ventilation or they're painting with oils or something like that.
Yep.
So that's my extremely non-expert advice on that topic. But yeah, my setup is much simpler. I have it's actually the old box for the Lego Death Star, which I chose not for thematic reasons, but purely because it was enormous. It's just a big cardboard box.
Yep.
I cut off one side of it and flipped it down so that it's like three sides.
Yeah.
Really, actually 4 sides of cardboard, and then the flip down portion is kind of like the surface that I put all my stuff on. And that's kind of an area that like contains the paint. And then it's literally just a box fan next to it that blows air out my garage. The setup is in my garage, so it's already a situation where, the ventilation is going to be marginally better than being inside. So I'll open my garage door sometimes all the way, sometimes I'll just crack it. I'll put that box fan next to my setup blowing out the garage, and then I've got the Death Star thing to kind of contain the overspray so that I'm not like painting my garage floor. But
yeah, I mean, for you, it's like you're in a climate that is generally warm for a good chunk of the year. I've got 6 to 8 months of miserable weather, so like I have to be in an indoor
Yep,
spot.
that makes sense.
I will say this though, just so none of you get any funny ideas, that this setup that I have or that Kyle has, that is not built for spray paint indoors. Do not spray paint
100%.
indoors.
Do not spray paint inside.
Like, please
do not spray paint in a poorly vented garage.
Yeah.
Spray paint outside.
Yeah. Also, spray paint is flammable. So anything that is not built to reduce flammable materials through ventilation, you shouldn't use for flammable materials. So that's specifically like my ventilation that I bought off of eBay is very much, or Amazon is very much for things that aren't flammable, like acrylic paints, not so.
Well, and specifically, the way an airbrush works is it's literally just like basically dripping paint into a tube, and then the air is pushing that paint out the front of the brush. So there's no air, like additional aerosol components like there is in a can of spray paint.
Yeah.
It's literally just paint and air. Very different animal. A can of spray paint, none of this applies to spray paint. So, all right. Well, that was a short airbrush setup. I'm sure we can do a more detailed video on airbrushing, which is its
I'm
whole
trying to think of some of the other,
thing,
some of the other questions real quick were like where to put your compressor, and so like mine, I got a really long cable for it. I think it's probably like 5 or 6 foot long cable. And I just set mine on the floor off to the side. As far as noise, like I'm out in I have an office that's detached from the house, so I don't really have to worry about that. But the ventilation and the air compressor both make noise, so it's just kind of something that comes with the territory. I know that they have like quieter air compressors, I've heard, but I've also not heard entirely great things about those. So I think the noise is just part of the deal. So you're gonna, be prepared for that. So
yeah, and mine's in my garage, so it's noisy, but it's only noisy when you're in the garage.
Right.
I've done it lots of times when my kids were sleeping, and it's not been an issue.
I think those are the big ones.
Yep. All right. Do you want to, so another topic briefly that people brought up was glazing. Do you want to hit that one before we do basing?
Yeah,
we can just talk about what they are.
Yeah. So there's a couple different versions of glazing. Kyle, you can talk about the Luke that you showed me and kind of talk about that.
The first time I used a glaze, it was a very early. I don't know if you can see this. This is
probably not because I'm sharing the screen too. But
there
you go. You can kind of see it.
Yeah, it's out of focus. This is Commander Luke, one of the first Legion miniatures I painted. I attempted to do OSL with a glaze. And basically a glaze, at least in the way that I used it here, it's just like a super thin pigment with a lot of medium, basically. So it goes on extremely thin, basically, and that's by design, because if you're using a glaze, you're using it to get something like an OSL effect or like a much more subtle gradient than you would get just using like a straight paint from a pot, or even watered down paint from a pot. So at least with this Commander Luke, I actually based this whole concept off a Sarastra video that I saw painting Commander Luke, where he used the glaze, and I did a much worse job than he did. But the short version is, at least with OSL, even if you're not using a glaze.
So what OSL is?
OSL, sorry. Yes, this is Hobby 101.
101. Yeah.
OSL is object source lighting.
Yep.
Which means that you try and make it so that the source of some kind of light in Star Wars, the most often use case for this is a lightsaber.
Yep.
But it can be other things like flames. Yep. I've seen a lot of people do this with like the Mando jetpacks and stuff, where they have flames out of them. But essentially, like any situation where you have a light source, you try and make it so that light source looks like it's being projected onto the model from the direction of the light source. It's really easy to mess up. I recall showing, I don't have her in front of me, but my Ventress, I did like one too many finger touches on the spray, and it went from like looking really good to just like blasted in the face with red, and just half her face is now red.
Yeah.
It's really easy to overdo OSL, so it's definitely not something that you should attempt if you're like a first time painter.
Yeah.
But anyway, you can do it with a glaze. I basically like highlighted on the actual colors underneath towards a brighter version of that color. So in this case, Luke is, his clothes are just like brown or tan. I did like lighter tans towards the lightsaber. So normally with like a miniature, they call it, I guess we could talk about lighting too, but they call it zenithal highlighting, where you try and make it so that like the source of the light is coming from the top of the model, and the stuff on top is going to be lighter than the stuff on bottom, and it creates like this illusion of light source. If you're doing OSL, then you want the direction of the light source to be from whatever it is that you're doing the OSL. In this case, the lightsaber, which also happens to be on top of the model, so that's easy enough. But so you do that with the highlighting, and then you just in extremely light layers repeatedly apply the glaze over that part of the model, and that's it. And you get to like this. In this case, again, you probably can't see it, but it should be a very subtle blue effect with the light.
Well, and you can see it on the shared screen on my snow trooper to the left.
Yep.
With the flame. But yeah, I mean, so Kyle did mention a medium. You can use water, so you can use just acrylic paint and water down the acrylic paint. You basically are looking for something a little bit thicker than a wash, right? Because a wash will, if it's too thin, it'll be a wash and it'll just go into the recesses. But you want it just thick enough so it stays where it is, but it's not over pigmenting or over coloring the area that you're on. All the paint companies put out mediums, which is kind of a paint thinner.
It's literally called medium. This one is I don't know if you can see this, but this is the Citadel one. It's Lamy and medium.
Or you can use that. I think Citadel does well with the medium. I found that like I use a lot of Monument Hobby now. They do well with water. I just use water and I just water it down. So OSL is one reason. I'm going to show you guys another way. Let me just refocus the camera here. How's that looking, Kyle? That looking all right?
Looks pretty good. Yeah, I see the bottom half of Ventress.
Yeah.
Shatterpoint Ventress, it looks like.
I love these models. They look so good.
Fantastic. Yeah.
So basically I'm using OSL on this to lighten up the highlights on her dress. So you can see all the highlights along the ridges. That's actually OSL and or not OSL, I'm sorry. Glaze. And so what I'm doing is basically you can use a glaze to mix or to slowly move from one either pigment or shade to another. So I'm using this to go from like a purple, like a darker purple, up to a like light pink. And basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to do OSL on this model as well because she has two lightsabers. So in all these light areas, especially as I get higher up, because she has one lightsaber that's right above, she's pointing straight out, and the other one is here, I can turn around, the other one's behind her. So as I lighten these up, I'll actually then go over with a red glaze to then give it an OSL on top of it. This is a lengthy process, but as you can tell, like what it does for me and what I end up always doing sometimes, and I've been really working on this as a hobbyist, is I'll go too light. Like I'll jump from like this purple to like a white all of a sudden, right? And it just doesn't make any sense. And so what I've been trying to do is just mix my paints better and then do levels of glazing. And sometimes it may not be as thin as like an OSL glazing. It'll be a little bit thicker, but it just helps me get kind of that like nice transition between the two shades. You can do this between two different colors, like a blue to a green. You can do this with shades of the same color. And actually, I'm mixing my own purple here, and then I'm actually going pink along for the light tones, but then glazing over with a purple to bring it to more of a light color. So it's going to be a process. And when you see it, ideally, you're not noticing it as hard as you would like a really bright. I don't want really bright like lines on her for her dress. So yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, I have not thought of using glaze that way, but it definitely seems like it would lend itself to that sort of technique.
Yeah, I mean, listen, it definitely creates more time, but I've just made a decision. And we were talking about this before we hit record with Ewoks, of course, because I'm obsessed. But that's my plan with Ewoks too, is I'm really just going to take my time and really focus on them. And like, I really want to bring up my painting level on my minis. And you're going to see some here and you go like, Jay, what are you talking about? These are really good, but I want to take them to that like next level. Like the I want to go above and like start going like award winning paint levels. That's my goal anyways in hobby. So yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. I tend to focus on painting specifically with tournament deadlines in mind, which helps motivate me. But
Yep.
I always try and make it so that that standard is, not something that is necessarily going to win a painting competition,
Mhm.
but that you can put in the mix for like, at a tournament, best painted something,
Yeah.
and have a shot at getting like second or third or
Yeah.
something like that.
I've always been stuck doing the same thing, right? Like rushing to get it done
Yeah.
for a tournament. And I've just made a decision, and really like doing MCP and Shatterpoint has really pushed me into this. Is like I just want to do really beautiful models. And so if I can't play Ewoks until November or something, because then that's just what it's going to be, because I'm not going to, or I have to bring a half painted army. Fine. I'm just not
Yep.
going to rush myself to be tournament ready or have a paint ready army, because I don't want to. I want them to look good. And like my goal with the Ewoks, I'm planning on doing an entire display board for my whole army. I'm going to paint another ATST. So I'm going to have my 6th or 7th ATST, but with Chewbacca this time coming out the top. And I'm gonna get a Han and a Leia and a Chewie, and I'm gonna repaint them. I'm gonna have the same basing. I'm gonna have the same paint style. Everything's gonna be the same. Because the problem, and I think a lot of us are like this, right? And you're gonna see this in some of like what I showed today on the screen. Some of these were done earlier when I didn't know certain techniques, and others were done later when I learned certain techniques, and so actually the ones all showing now, each were painted at different techniques. And so like I'm just looking forward to having an entire army that's all the same technique
Consistent. Yeah.
and consistent, like whatever the level may be. My mental goal is to be great, but like whatever the level is going to be, I'm going to have consistency among my entire army. And then when I do go to like an LVO, or if I'm lucky enough to be able to play at Adepticon in some form, I'll have a beautiful army that I can put on a display tray that I can enter into a contest. And that's really my goal now. Because and we've talked about this and like kind of being burnt out and stuff. And I think I'm trying to get back to the roots, and that's the reflective in how we're doing Scoundrels now. I'm trying to get back to the roots of why I love this game and what makes me love mini games, right? And God help me, but MCP and Shatterpoint has really helped me realize that, like, just because the models are so beautiful, and
Yep.
there's only like 10 of them, and so
Yeah, it lets you,
yeah,
the fact that every model that you're taking is essentially like a showpiece.
yeah,
It really lets you focus.
yeah,
And I think that's a benefit of games like that. And something that clearly in a game like Legion, where you have potentially 30 models, you can spend that level of effort on all of them, and it sounds like you intend to do that with Ewoks. I used to do this for 40K, and it was exhausting because I
Yep.
played orcs.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
you might have to paint like 120
Yeah.
minis, and it would take me years to get an army that was like, tournament ready basically. And then by the time I did that, it'd be bad. But Legion is more manageable in that it's probably only 30 models. Even
Yeah.
Ewoks, which is notionally a horde army, you're talking about what, like maybe 50?
Yeah.
Which is in the grand scheme of things, for the level
Very
of effort,
reasonable.
it's very reasonable. So yeah, I think that's a great goal.
I'm gonna try, right? And I think I can't guarantee that my heroes will be at the same level as my core units, or
Yep.
vice versa. But my goal is to try to get my core units as close to possible. And I've been working on some like techniques here to kind of like streamline some of the like certain pieces so that I can just because really, yeah, and I swear we're going to talk about bases, but really,
Yeah.
like if you think about it, there's certain levels of the paint that aren't really the most important. They're the like the base layers, right? So I've been doing a lot of black priming everything black and then
Mhm.
doing the zenithal highlight from the top with the white with the airbrush. That's how I'm doing my minis from now on.
Yep.
It's by far like I've been holding off so long. Actually, I used to do it reverse and I kind of still do this, but like I don't know if it'll show on here. But like with some of these droids, see if I can. What I do is I paint them, I fully paint them up, and then I'll hit them with like a dark gray from underneath. So I'm actually
Uh-huh.
doing the reverse. I'm doing the shadow from below
Yep.
versus the highlight from above. And so
I actually do both,
yeah.
but that's we can, when we talk about airbrushing, we can talk about
Yep.
that, but I don't know if you can see Padme. But she's got both
Oh, yeah.
directions.
That's
with
good.
She's painted almost entirely with an airbrush, all that white,
Oh my
like
God. Yeah.
her whatever you call it, jumpsuit, that isn't 100% airbrush. I didn't use a paintbrush on that at all.
Wow.
Um,
That's amazing.
so it's super easy to do, honestly, with an airbrush, but we can save that for an airbrushing
Yeah.
episode.
But that might be, as an example, that might be something I do with the Ewoks, right? Like, right.
Yep.
Okay, these like take one Ewok from every unit of 10 or whatever and say, okay, he's the gray and white one. All right, for each unit. That's that like race of Ewok. And then all right, these guys are going to be the brown and darker brown one. You know what I mean? And then just
Yep.
hit them with an airbrush to like get those primary colors on quick and then go in and do all the detail work and layer up from there.
Yep.
So anyways, but yeah.
And Fur's really good about that. We definitely need to schedule a Fur hobby episode sometime around the Ewok release.
Okay. Yeah, we could actually, so if you guys want, you tell us. For those of you listening to the audio podcast, we're showing things on video on YouTube. But we could even live paint during a cast so that Kyle and I can talk about it and show you different. Airbrushing is going to be a little bit harder. I think I can work it out, figure it out, but at least hand painting, we can do that here.
Yep, for sure.
But yeah, there's a lot of fur techniques. There's
a million different ways to paint fur. Most of them are pretty easy. So,
yeah, I'm doing it the hard way. I'm gonna be very straightforward with you right now.
Painting each individual hair follicle,
basically.
Yeah.
So I did this with Beast for MCP. So I know he's far away, but I actually painted.
Save it for the fur episode.
Sorry. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm just so excited.
I know. I know that you're excited.
Oh man, I love the hobby parts. This has been a long time coming.
I agree. Not like we've never talked about hobby on this cast before.
Yeah, but not like this.
We've never dedicated an entire episode to it, I don't think. So
not with purpose.
Right. Yes.
So yeah.
All right.
Let's talk about basing.
Yeah. So before we talk about the specific methods, as you're doing the camera pan there, basing is definitely not a step that you should neglect. It's super important. It's the easiest thing to see from 3 feet away, which is the distance that most people are going to be looking at your models at. It helps a lot to establish like a cohesive look with your army. There's a thing called, I think it's the cheerleader effect, but basically that stuff looks better when it's all consistent and together.
Yep.
Than it does like individually. So even if each of your individual models may not be, like the best you can possibly do, if you've got 10 of them together and they're all painted relatively consistently and they all have a consistent basing, it will help exponentially increase how it looks on a table. So Basing is super important. There's an old painting mantra called faces and bases, which means that if you focus on the faces and bases, your stuff will look good, even if the rest of it doesn't, because those are the things
Yep.
that draw the eye the most. So
Well, I mean, if you guys, like, here, let me turn this guy a little bit, but like, if you guys were to look, I mean, just look at the video, right? And what are the two things you look at? Their face and their base, right?
Yep.
Like, so yeah, it's absolutely true.
Yep. All right. Tell us about all these different
Yeah.
basing techniques you have
Techniques.
there,
Yeah.
Jay.
So I pulled out just a bunch of like random kind of ideas of different things I've worked on over the years. And I think what I wanted to say was there's kind of different ways of doing it depending on how comfortable you are with it, right? And one of the cool things, and this one I've kind of picked up from Dustin, who used to work with us, Jagged Brush Studios, was
Yep.
one of the things I always really liked about what he did with some of his models was actually do like a mix of snow, mud, and grass. And what I found with that was it like really created this dynamic basing that made it very interesting and like almost like real world livable, right? And so like for instance, the one we're looking at now, let me see if I could get a little zoomy zoom on him. Yeah, there we go. The one we're looking at now is the generic commander for the rebels. And basically what I did was I took a mud texture for the bottom. I think I actually created the mud texture myself out of a coarse medium and brown paint.
How
And
did you do that, Jay?
yeah, so actually, I'm gonna I guess I'll show you.
Let's talk about textures, because that's kind of like step one of
Yeah.
almost any basing thing.
So let me zoom it out here a little
Okay.
bit, but I'll show you. So I don't know if you can see this, but let me. Yeah. So you can get this. It's 250 milliliters of this stuff. It's Liquitex basic acrylics. It's in the painting section of the hobby store, and it's coarse texture medium. It goes on a little white, but mostly clear. And then what I did was at the same hobby store in the same painting section, I just went and got basic acrylic burnt umber brown. So this is like canvas painting paint. And so I pick that up, I mix it myself. And then you can see like on that guy's base, that's that like brown dirt texture underneath.
Yeah, there's a lot of different ways to
Yeah.
do that. There's simple and cheap, like you mentioned. There is simple and not cheap, like you're showing now, which is a Citadel texture technical paint. Sterling Mud is the one that you've got up on the screen there. That's actually, I think actually it's called Battlemire. Sterling Battlemire is one of my favorite ones. But Citadel sells these texture paints, and Citadel's not the only company. There are Army Painter does them. There's quite a few other miniatures painting companies that sell like their own contained pre-mixed texture paints that all you have to do is like slap it on your base. And it'll give you a great starting point for basing, because after it dries, it'll dry as whatever that texture is. For Citadel, they've got one for stone, they have one for mud, they have one for dirt, they have one for sand, they have one for like red Mars style dirt. They have like one of the things that's great for texture paints is crackle bases.
Oh yeah.
So if you want to do like a cracked desert base, they actually have texture paints that will crackle. And there's one right there on the Magna Guard.
Yeah.
With the lava base there is, and it's one of the easiest ways to get that look. It looks really cool. It looks like you put a lot of effort into it. It's literally just a texture paint. Obviously that it's painted, after you put the texture paint on, you want to then paint the texture paint, whatever color you want to do. I'm sure you painted that brown mud texture paint a little bit. Even if you just give it like a dry brush of a slightly lighter color, like if you're doing mud and it goes on brown, do like a tannish dry brush on top of it to bring out the texture a little bit.
Yeah, like this one we're showing with the desert. So it's the old Stormtide Commander. But yeah, that's I think it was, what is it, the Armageddon dust.
Yep.
And then you just do like a light high. You could do a wash too to bring out the recesses, make them a little bit darker, and then do like a white highlight, or like a lighter, not white, but like a skeleton bone highlight over the top with a
Yep.
dry brush. It's that easy.
Yeah, and I've got for my Republic miniatures, I use don't get distracted by the Felucia style grass, but if you look at like the gray underneath, that's just a texture paint that I actually washed. I used a purple wash for Felucia reasons, but then I just dry brushed it with like a lighter gray over that, and it creates kind of like this purplish stone look. I don't know. It's probably hard to see on the thing, but like texture paint, if you literally do nothing more than put it on and hit it with a wash and then a dry brush over that, it can look really good.
Yeah, and then like one of these, what I've found, and kind of circling back, yeah, textures, or like multiple textures on one base, and
Yep.
that's kind of where it's going with like the snow, mud, and grass. But
Yep.
one of the cool things that, and I'm actually going over to it now. This is by, we actually featured him in one of our magazines, Taciturn Moose. That's what he likes going by.
Taciturn.
Taciturn
Probably.
Moose. Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't even know what it is.
Yeah.
But he actually used this technique where he took the premium bases,
Yep.
he painted them, and then he put a texture on top of it.
That's
Like,
really
so
cool.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so that I learned that from him, and I really like that. Like, the other thing you can do is using combinations of textures and colors. So if you look at the snow trooper that's on the screen right now, basically I just painted his base like a light blue with some white streaking, like ice or something, and then I just put like snow texture on top of it. And just creating those multiple layers, that's what I found the most successful with basing. And back to the Magna Guard. So I painted the base red. I then put that texture, that black texture on top of it. It cracks. The thicker it is in spots, the more it'll crack. And then like the places where you can actually see the red and the orange, and I kind of like left certain spots open on the base and then let it crack around. And then what I did was I just took my fine brush, I came back through and then just painted the orange, yellows, and white highlights to kind of bring up that lava. And then I believe I did dry brush a little bit over the top on this one too, to just bring up the highlights on that.
Yeah, a little bit of dry brush goes a long way on top of those texture paints. And for those that, I guess this is Hobby 101, that don't know what dry brushing is, you just take like an old big chunky brush that has spread apart bristles. Let me see if I have my dry brush here. Yeah, here we go. Too many paintbrushes. Here we go. It's just an old brush that has like some nice, reasonably stiff bristles, kind of thick. You dip that in the paint. Do not thin it out with water or anything like that. Take like a paper towel, brush it back and forth on a paper towel until you've got like a significant amount of the paint off the brush. Yep. I like to kind of brush it on my hand too, just to like see how much paint I still have left on the brush. After dry brushing, I get like these streaks on my palm. And then you just go over the miniature, over the base or whatever it is. We'll use an unpainted Mr. Callus here, and you just literally like just kind of lightly like brush it over the whole thing, and it'll pick up the paint on just the raised parts of the texture. So
yeah, I recommend you want to go a little fast. You don't want to go slow, because then the bristles will sink into some of those recesses.
Yeah, you want to do like this kind of thing for those that are watching on video, just quick motions back and forth. Yeah,
like that. I thought this was interesting. I wanted to show this. This is a model that I did. There's a game from Cool Mini or Not called Massive Darkness that came out, and I was painting some of those miniatures. And in the game they have this really cool like game mat, or cardboard that you use. And so what I did was I actually hand painted. You guys could see this on the video. I actually hand painted the base to look like stone.
Oh, wow.
So that's something you could also do too. I actually painted those little skeletons and stuff on there. That's all hand painted.
It's a lot of
on the
work.
base. Yeah, it is. But it's an interesting way to do it too, you know? And then because I think one of the problems is, right, and this is something we can talk about now, I guess, is when do you base and put on the mini? Do you put the mini on first and base around it, or do you base and then put the mini on top of it?
So it depends. This is the short answer on
Yeah.
what you're doing for your basing. If your basing is relatively flat, I think you could do the mini first. If you're basing, I mean, you want to think too about your biome and your environment too. Like if you're doing mud, then it's, for example, then it's going to make some sense that
Yes.
your space dude, space gal, whatever, is going to sink into the mud a little bit, right, as they're walking. So then in that case, it makes more sense to glue the miniature directly onto the base and then do the mud around the feet.
Yep.
Because it'll give this, instead of them just randomly awkwardly standing like fully on top of the mud. For other things that you might sink into like sand or dirt, I think it makes sense to do that too. And that's usually how I do it for those. If you're doing something like hard stone or cracked earth, then it probably makes more sense to do the base without the miniature on it first, and then do the miniature and then glue it onto the base. So most of my basing schemes are either dirt or mud, so I tend to glue the miniature on first.
Yep.
And then do the base around the feet. But obviously there's some basing techniques too, like if you're doing any sort of spraying for your basing technique, or any other sort of painting where you could potentially like mess up the miniature on top of the base by doing your basing scheme, then clearly you want to do the base first and then glue the miniature on. But
yeah,
that's a good question.
Yeah, and I think, there's a couple different ways of doing that. I know a lot of people, especially if you have like one of these handles, like you like having the base on still so that, it has something to grip. Ways around that are like sticky tack.
Sticky tack. Yeah.
You know what? This is a really stupid way of doing it, but I've done this where I've actually super glued it onto the base and then just kind of like
broken it off.
Yeah, and then just broke it off, right? Using like a knife or something underneath the foot and then cleaned it off and then redid the base, like if I was in a pinch, right? So one of the things I did want to talk about today too was basing for vehicles and how it's a little bit different. And so the two examples I'm showing now are the land speeder and the snail tank. And the difference between these, what I like to think about is when they're a repulsor vehicle, I like putting things on the base to show that they're like flying over stuff. So like for instance, with the land speeder, you see there's like sticks and rocks and they're like zooming through a forest, right? And then with this snail tank, because he's a ground vehicle, I'm basically just using like flat kind of like a little bit of grass, a little bit of like poofs here and there, and then just a regular mud kind of texture underneath.
Yeah, and with vehicles especially, I feel like it's important to have a lot of like visual variety in kind of the colors and the textures on your base, just because there's so much space to cover.
Yeah.
And I think you've done a good job there where you're showing the snail tank there, but you've got the sandy desert as kind of your base, but then you have that grassy flock there as like one thing, but then you've also got those kind of brownish little grass chunks to break it up. And that's really only like 3 separate things, but it helps a ton to just kind of visually break it up over that big wide area.
Yeah, and it really doesn't have to be that much. Like the darker tufts, I've only got 2 on this side, and I think I got like 1 or 2 on the other side, right? But it's just enough to make it feel more real, and real's a strong word, but you know what I mean. Just
real, yeah. And you can so we talked about the texture paints. We talked about painting the texture paints. Kind of the next step for me whenever I do basing, and this is one of those things that I've evolved to make my basing techniques have evolved over time in decreasing levels of difficulty and increasing amounts of hopefully how good they look. But my standard process now is to basically use that texture paint as a base and then just add some kind of either static grass or
Yep.
flock or both. So
Yep.
for those that don't know what those are, flock is you can buy all kinds of different types of flock. Some of it's cheap in giant containers, some of it's less cheap in smaller containers, but basically it's just something that you like sprinkle on. And you can sprinkle it on if you want directly on your texture paint while it's drying. I prefer to like let the texture paint dry, do the thing where I paint the texture paint, do all that, and then put a little bit of glue, like literally Elmer's glue, on top of it, and then sprinkle it on top of the Elmer's glue. Elmer's glue dries pretty clear, so that generally makes it so that like the color of your flock isn't going to be, or the texture of your flock isn't going to be messed up by the glue. And then static grass is basically, I wish I had one of them within arm's reach, but another thing that you can buy from hobby stores, you can buy it online from various retailers. I think we actually still have some on our web store.
Yep.
And essentially it's like little bits of sticky grass tufts that you should still glue them down even though they're sticky on the bottom. You just do a little glob of glue, and you literally just like stick it onto your base, and it's like a little tuft of grass. You can see them super easily on your snail tank. The little brown things are grass tufts. They come in all different colors. Of course, you have the normal green ones. Like here's my, like on this B2, it's just green grass tufts on top of green flock, which is on top of the brown texture paint. And it gets this grassy. There's a rebel trooper with a grass tuft right there. You can get all kinds of crazy colors. If you're looking for a Felucia look, you can see here on my Padme, you can't see the green because of how my green screen is picking it up. But there's one here that's like pink and purple. There's another that's like orange and red. You can get all kinds of different colors, and they really help to add like vertical depth to your base. So and for really minimal amount of effort.
Yep. Yeah, and it's pretty inexpensive too, grass tufts.
Yep.
So, all right. So the next thing you wanted to talk about, Kyle, what can you see very clearly on that snail tank?
Firing arcs.
Yep.
So it is important when you're doing basing on vehicles in Legion to make sure that you can still see the firing arcs. I've seen a lot of people, especially early in the game, where and actually I'm including
Some
myself
new
in this
players,
population. I messed up my ATRTs with the firing arcs to the point where actually, and there was a market for this, so a lot of people messed this up. I actually looked online for, it was like a laser cut thing that you would slot into the front notch, and it had like a firing arc that would stick out from the front. Eventually I went back and I fixed all my bases to not have to do that. But you need to make sure when you're doing your actual basing that you have it so that the firing arcs are like imprinted into the basing material.
Yep.
There's a couple ways you can do it. If you're using a texture paint or you're making your own texture, you can actually use the edge of something hard, like a ruler, to imprint the arc in the texture before it dries. I don't know if that's what you did there, Jay. It kind of looks like that's kind of what you did.
So mine may be dumb and a little, but basically what I do is I take the back of the X-Acto knife blade and I just run it along the arcs, and I just kind of, it's just kind of like scrapes out, and then I clean it up a little bit to make sure it looks all right, and then off I go.
Yeah, I use the edge of a I thought I had one here. It's actually gosh, I don't have one. It's like a little metal tool that it's basically like a texture applicator tool, but and it's pointy. And I do the same thing where the texture is drying. I'll just run it. I'll run it along the actual arc to preserve that line. But you can use a ruler where you stick it in there. I always also, just as like a hedge in case I somehow mess that up, I usually paint a line on the edge of the base. Just while I'm painting the model, I'll end up painting over it later, but paint a line on the edge of the base where the arcs are supposed to be.
Yep.
In case I mess up that line
I've
while
done
I'm doing
that before.
because once you put that texture on, it's going to be a lot harder to find where those indents are supposed to be. But So
Yeah.
yeah, there's a couple ways. Imprint a ruler in there. Use the edge of something sharp to run it through, but basically you want to do it while your whatever it is that you're putting on your base is still drying.
Yep.
So
Yeah, I think the only other thing I wanted to talk about with basing, and MCP, this is my Luke Cage for MCP.
nice.
But one of the cool things that MCP does, and AMG's doing in general, I know we make fun of it a lot, but the tactical rock,
Yeah.
right? But I think creating something cool underneath your mini, right, to kind of help sell, what it is that they do, right? So this is Luke Cage for anybody who's not familiar, and he's super strong, right? And he can bend metal, and his, he's bulletproof and all this stuff. So they've got this great like steel garter underneath him that he's clearly like stepped on and bent in half, right? And so like I think in lieu of AMG's doing better at this, and they're coming up with better models, but in the meantime, having pieces like this as part of your base or around your model, just kind of helping sell whatever it is that miniature does or is known for, is something that can really help as well. And like what I would recommend is, some people I think go a little too far, but like one piece like that helps, right? Like,
Yep.
and then the rest, and then basically, the rest of this, though it's painted, I definitely didn't spend as much time on this base, because the focus is really from the steel, I guess it's not steel because it oxidizes, but the metal all the way up through Luke, right? He's the focus. So
Yep.
kind of keeping this base simple and straightforward, and just the grays of the concrete. Yeah, that's kind of what I'm doing.
Speaking of, do you want to talk about base rims real quick?
Yeah, love to.
So there's really, I think, at least 3 common different ways to do base rims.
Yep.
The first is to paint it some kind of unobtrusive color that's not the same as the basing material, usually like a black, to highlight that basing material that's directly above it. That's kind of where I've come around to. You can see pretty much all my bases. Here's Mr. Skywalker. And of course the colors are showing up badly because he's green OSL, and that's not working with my green screen. But you can see the black base over the red, or underneath the red basing material. Here, B2 is easier. There you go.
Yep.
Black base. I like painting the base rims black. So that's option number 1. Option number 2 is to paint the base rim whatever is consistent with your basing material above it. And you've got that with your Snow Trooper, with Kalani there, with your Rebel Trooper, where it's kind of like, if you were to dig down below your basing layer, what color would whatever it is underneath be? So that's going to be like brown for dirt, tan for sand, blue for that icy look, whatever that is. That's a great way to do it too. And then the third thing that I've seen, particularly with Legion, where squad markings are super important, is if people don't do squad markings like and on the actual model, they will just paint the base rims different colors.
Yep.
For different squads, which personally I've never been a fan of how that looks visually, but it is extremely clear. It's one of the clearest things you can do to differentiate your minis from each other. So for that, it's great, and I think it's a totally valid thing to do with your bases. So.
Yeah, and I used to do that with all my original army Empire. All my stormtroopers have like brightly colored, like my E-webs, one's like this bright blue, the other one's a bright red, like just to keep track and make sure that which one are you shooting, blue or red? Like it just to make sure. I am slowly moving away from that and moving into squad markings on the actual squad itself. So like, for instance, I have 2, I'm going to put up 2 B2s here. So I basically changed their basings, but also the main color on their cowl or whatever. One's brown and one's blue, to just separate them.
Yeah, we could do a whole separate Hobby 101 on squad markings. But yeah, I do the same, where I do it on the miniature. You can see this B2 here. I've got like white kind of lines on the underneath part of the cowl, and then same thing on the back.
Yep.
And that's a different color for my different B2 units. So
yeah, I think it's gonna be really hard with the Ewoks. I'm gonna have to look at them and like figure out what
yeah,
what the
fur color, I guess.
what that's gonna be. But I don't know. Maybe
Feathers. Do they have like feathers and stuff on them? I don't actually
maybe
know.
I'm gonna make some. But
Yeah.
like I think maybe when I was talking about before, like each one in each maybe teams will be the same like race of Ewok, where maybe okay, these are the brown and gray and white ones, these are black and gray and white ones, these are the brown and darker brown ones, these are the lighter, like, and just keep them all kind of that way. But we'll see.
Yeah, so there's it looks like, looking at the miniatures, there's some options. They have like their head wrap things. You know, they have like bits of clothing and stuff on them that you can paint different colors. Obviously you could do fur colors. You could do like different colored rope.
Yeah.
There's a lot of rope on these miniatures, but I don't know. We'll see. I'm curious to see what you and other Ewok players come up with for that.
Yeah, it's funny. Gosh, so I may go back to my old goblin orc days where I had like, and they do this in Warhammer anyways, but like each kind of like have their own like sigil or whatever. So like some of my gobos I actually hand painted like white handprints like on their faces and stuff, and like and then on like I had a giant that actually they all slapped like as he was going through the ranks, and so he's got like white paint all over his legs.
That's awesome.
And he had like a goblin riding him. And so but like, yeah, maybe I'll do something like that. Maybe they'll each I'll have to look and see if there's anything canon for like sigils or something amongst the Ewoks. And like but you're right, they're all wearing hoods, so I could make like one unit all like green, one unit all gray, one unit all brown. But yeah, we'll see. But I'm very excited about this whole Ewok thing.
Yeah, I can tell.
Yeah.
1 month, basically, right?
Dude, yeah.
Yeah.
It's
they will. I think they're releasing the Friday before Lone Star Open. So, and there is no 11-day rule anymore. So technically, I think they will be legal for that. I'll be very impressed if anyone brings like an entire Ewok army, much less any significant number of them. But who knows? Sometimes people do that where they, get the mini the day before, do like a marathon 24-hour paint session or something. And
well, and I guess the question would be too, if LSO is letting proxies, like, so, as long as they have the cards, but they got like, proxies or something in there, that'd be.
Yeah. I don't know what you'd proxy for an Ewok, but
I don't know. But you remember that one years and years ago, that before Wookiees were out, that one guy had an all Wookiee rebel army.
Yep.
Oh man, that was so good.
Yep. Yeah, that was at LVO.
Yeah.
Yep.
But yeah, I'm really excited. Yeah, Ewoks are gonna be so much fun. I'm gonna make them fun,
Be the change, Jay.
Yeah.
Be the change you want to see.
So excited.
Yep. All right. Well, do you have any other final thoughts?
No. I've been just mostly about Ewoks. Like, I think it was, what was it, Adepticon? They had a downed ATST and like all the Ewoks were in front of it. And I was thinking about maybe getting one and putting that as like, I'm gonna build like a full-on like
for your display board.
Yeah, it's not gonna be small. Like, it's gonna be a pain in the ass to take anywhere. So like, I'm gonna like anywhere I go, I won't be able to fly to bring it. So it'll probably have to be like Adepticon or like, you know what I mean? I probably won't be able to bring it to LVO, but like, yeah, I'm bringing like a full-on like, it's probably going to be like a 3x3 table by the time I'm done or something, because it's just how excited I am about the whole thing. So
yeah, we could do a whole nother thing on display boards. This isn't as big of a thing for Legion. I've seen a couple. There are a couple people with display boards. I would say they tend to be the exception rather than the rule. Something where they're super common is the GW games, particularly Age of Sigmar and 40K, and they're just They're insane. I've seen some people where like you get
Yeah.
like a Space Marine army and they build out like the entire interior hull of a ship complete with Gothic
Oh, yeah.
architecture and LEDs and or something where they've got like I saw one guy who had drop pods
Yeah.
streaking from the sky and he had them mounted on like um some kind of booms that were like attached to his cart that he had the display board on and I don't know, it's crazy.
Yeah,
And very impressive the things that people do.
Yeah,
so.
like Adepticon is a big show for that. Like I saw a guy he had like an entire like orc encampment, and then like like that was his display board. I was
Yep.
like, dude, that's so amazing. I mean,
Yep.
it's basically what I want to do for the Ewoks. Is just have
There
this
you go.
really fun
Well,
display board for him,
yeah, well, Down Day TST would be a good place to start.
Yeah, and like one of my things is I think AMG has done a wonderful job with their paint jobs and like how all the photos and like everything that they do, right? My only critique, and I don't even, it's not even criticism, it's just a critique, is that like if you look at any of the pictures, like there's this one where it's this beautiful jungle board that they have, and they have a Down Day TST that's got like vines and dirt and moss on it, but then all the bases for the Ewoks are like this weird like desert hybrid base, and it was just like, well, what, why? You know what I mean? It's just like,
I'm currently
guys?
because I went to look at the Ewok minis and I'm currently looking at like the article for the Ewok Warriors preview. And you're right, it's this great the landscape that they're on is like this great jungle thing with all these plants and moss, and it clearly a lot of work went into this board, and then all the actual Ewok miniatures have desert bases.
Yeah. Which, I mean, don't get me wrong, look great separately.
These are incredibly well painted
yes
miniatures that look amazing. But
like if you look at the photo, like there's a couple of photos with like the black backgrounds with the Ewoks. They look great. They look fantastic. It's just somewhere inside of me, I just got slightly disappointed when I see this beautiful like Endor like background, and then the bases just don't match it at all. And I'm just like, oh man, that's that hurts my soul. So, but yeah, I'm really excited. And like I just it's gonna be great. But
I'm excited to see what you do.
Yeah. I'm sure we're gonna be sharing it once a month, once every few episodes on this podcast, because we're gonna be hobby episode is now in full rotation.
Yeah. For now, my short-term hobby goal is one miniature, and that is this bad boy right here, Agent Callus.
Boy. Isn't it so funny how 1 points change can change the world?
15 points is a lot, Jay.
Yeah. I was running him when he was full points. You guys are just jumping on the bandwagon.
No, actually, I mean, you can testify to the fact, because I bought him from our store, that I bought Callus the week before the points change came out, because I was already making lists. I'm like, you know what? Here's an interesting way to solve the double bounty command card tension, and that's Agent Callus. And then he got 15 points cheaper. But then Boba Fett got 10 points more, so it's kind of a wash. But
I will say real quick,
I
know we're going to talk about this more next week, most likely. But I just an offering out to people. We'll talk about this next week, but take a look at Callus Operative Vader. Just take a look at that. There's a 3-turn swing where Vader will always have an order, and you will always have priority for 3 turns.
Callus is good for that.
Yeah, and so just I don't know. I know everyone's high on the Callus double bounty, but I think Callus Operative Vader is pretty nice as well. So anywho, well, I hope everyone enjoyed this. I hope you guys liked the hobby talk, and I hope it was helpful. If you join our Patreon, we have a channel called Podcast Topics on our Discord, where we actually take your topics. So
and you can suggest specifically what things you want us to talk about, ask questions.
And we will talk about them.
Yeah, and so far, at least for the last 2 episodes, pretty much everything related to our main topics have been straight from that channel on the Discord.
So. Yeah, whether directly or a very so I know last week I mentioned some of our Discord Patreon supporters because we used their exact question. This week, we used kind of a combination of a bunch of people's questions. So the whole
it's more-
Patreon gets credit.
Yeah, more of a muse than
Yeah.
like a specific question, but yeah. All right.
Yeah, Ewoks. Woo, 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 woo.
Ewoks.
Actually,
Callus.
it also gives me an excuse to paint some more, like repaint some of my Rebel Troopers too. So I'm
There
really
you go.
excited about that.
Yeah, I gotta go back and do that at some point. My
Yeah.
Rebel Troopers, I really mailed it in.
Yep. Han, Leia, some Rebel
don't look great.
Troopers. No,
Yeah.
yeah, I got to redo them all. And this gave me a great opportunity. So,
Yep. All right.
okay.
Well, we are the Notorious Scoundrels. I'm Kyle.
I'm Jay.
Stay fresh, cheese bags.
So this is a DSLR camera, and
Okay.
you have to get this special like webcam utility for it to even work.
Hmm.
And it doesn't always work for whatever reason. But once it connects to it, it's good. It's just like for whatever. All right. Anyways, we lost camera too. But one of the things I did want to talk about too, which you know what, I'm gonna pause here, Kyle.
Yeah, that makes sense.